What if the pain you're going through right now isn't a punishment, but a path? What if the silence you feel from God isn't absence, but preparation? And what if everything that looks like a delay, a failure, or a dead end is actually Him setting the table in a room you haven't entered yet? You see, most people read Psalm 23 for comfort, but they never realize it's not just a poem, it's a prophecy. It's a spiritual blueprint for direction, prosperity, and legacy. Because you're not just meant to survive the valley, you're meant to walk through it and come out with something eternal. So before you give up, before you accept the lie that you've been forgotten, listen closely. This message was written for your soul, and it's about to show you why your darkness might be the very place God starts building your legacy. When David said, "The Lord is my shepherd," he wasn't just making a poetic statement. He was declaring who was in charge of his future. He wasn't saying, "I gave up." He was saying, "I finally trust." And that's exactly where most people fail in life. Not in action, but in trust. We spend our days trying to control everything: money, people, timing, results. But prosperity doesn't begin with control. It begins with surrender. Not to people, not to systems, but to a force far greater, far wiser, and far more invested in your purpose than even you are. The shepherd knows every sheep by name, knows when they're tired, knows when they've wandered too far, knows when they're about to fall off a cliff. That's the kind of awareness we don't have on our own. That's why David didn't say, "I'm the shepherd of my life." He said, "The Lord is." Because prosperity without direction is a disaster waiting to happen. You can get rich and still be lost. You can hit all your goals and still feel like something's missing. That's not a coincidence. That's the result of chasing a reward with no spiritual alignment. Napoleon Hill said, "There can be no success without peace of mind." And peace of mind comes from knowing you're not walking alone. That what you're building isn't just for your pocket, it's for your legacy. When David followed the shepherd, he wasn't just hoping for safety. He was following a path of provision, clarity, and elevation. When he says, "I shall not want," he's not talking about some mystical promise that everything will magically show up. He's talking about a state of mind, the kind that says, "I may not have it all right now, but I have everything I need for this moment." That is the foundation of abundance. Not having more, but knowing that what you have is already enough to begin. You don't need to see the whole staircase, just the next step. That's faith. That's the mental state Hill refers to when he talks about burning desire backed by belief. When you believe you're already equipped, you stop doubting every move. You act, you move, you build, and you attract more. What most people call luck is usually just alignment. Someone aligned with their purpose, moving with faith, acting without fear. When David says, "He makes me lie down in green pastures," he's painting a picture that looks like rest, but it's really preparation. The green pastures are not the destination. They're a place to recharge, to get clear, to connect again. Because sometimes you can't hear direction when you're stuck in movement. You need quiet. Silence is where the shepherd speaks. And the world hates silence because it forces us to face the parts of ourselves we've been avoiding. But in that silence, in those green pastures, something shifts. You realize that the path ahead is not yours to control, only yours to follow. You begin to recognize the signs, the open doors, the divine redirections. You stop forcing and start flowing. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's why Hill teaches that the subconscious mind must be impressed daily with clarity and belief. Because what you meditate on is what you manifest. The green pastures aren't just moments of rest. They're spaces where your spirit remembers what your mind forgot. Then David says, "He leads me beside still waters." Not chaotic waves, still waters. Calm, focused, reflective. Why? Because you can't see your reflection in a storm. You can't see who you truly are when everything is loud, fast, and constantly changing. Stillness reveals truth, and truth restores. When Hill talks about the power of autosuggestion, he's really pointing to the same principle: stillness of the mind, clarity of focus, intentional programming. Your inner world becomes your outer reality. If your mind is chaotic, your life will follow. If your spirit is at peace, you'll find prosperity even in the midst of pressure. He restores my soul, not my image, not my bank account, not my reputation, my soul. Because what's the point of success if you lose yourself in the process? How many people chase results and wake up empty when they get them? They got the job but lost their peace. They got the followers but lost their faith. They got the house but lost their sense of home. Restoration isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. The healed version, the aligned version, the powerful but peaceful version. David walked through fire, betrayal, and war. He made mistakes that would have broken most people, but he still said, "He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake." In other words, even when I feel unworthy, God is still guiding me. Not because of who I am, but because of who he is. That's grace. That's legacy. That's why Napoleon, he'll stress the importance of definite purpose, not just to achieve, but to become. To live with intention, to wake up with meaning, not just chasing success, but creating impact. When you walk in righteousness, your name carries weight, not because you demanded it, but because you lived it. This is the foundation of true wealth. Knowing who's leading, where you're going, and why it matters. That's not religion, that's clarity. And clarity is one of the rarest forms of power. People with vision don't panic, they don't beg, they don't waste time trying to be everything for everyone. They stay on the path. And as Hill said, the ladder of success is never crowded at the top. That's because few are willing to take the narrow, righteous path that leads there. You're not here to wander. You're here to walk with boldness, guided by wisdom, fueled by faith. Not just to survive, but to build something that matters. Not just to succeed, but to align your success with your soul. The shepherd isn't offering a shortcut. He's offering security. He's not promising an easy road, he's promising a meaningful one. One that brings peace, direction, and legacy. And the best part? He's not just showing the way, he's walking it with you. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. That sentence alone could be a lifetime mantra. Because here's the truth. Everyone goes through valleys. Some are emotional, others are financial. Many are invisible, buried beneath smiles and social media posts. The valley of the shadow of death isn't just about literal danger. It's about the places in life where you feel like you're surrounded by darkness. No direction, no clarity, no sign that it's getting better. And yet, David says he's not afraid. Why? Not because he's strong, but because he's not alone. Fear doesn't come from what we face. Fear comes from believing we're facing it alone. When Hill talks about faith as the eternal elixir that gives life, power, and action to thought, he's describing the exact force David relied on. Faith is the antidote to fear, not the absence of danger, but the presence of trust. Imagine walking through a dark forest at night. Alone, every sound is terrifying. But if you're walking with someone who knows the path, the fear starts to fade. That's the image David gives us. That even in the lowest valley, the shepherd walks beside him. Not behind, not ahead, beside. Your valley might look like debt, a failed relationship, an inner storm no one sees. But you are not walking it alone. And fear has no power when your soul is anchored. That's why David says, "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Those tools weren't just symbolic, the rod was for protection. The staff was for guidance. One kept enemies away, the other kept the sheep from falling off cliffs. That's the dual nature of divine leadership, defense and direction. Sometimes what feels like a setback is really protection. And sometimes, the tug you feel to shift paths is the staff pulling you back from danger. We rarely recognize protection in the moment. It feels like delay, rejection, resistance. But later, we see it clearly. That door you cried over was keeping you from a room too small for your purpose. That no you resented was really a redirection to something greater. Hill teaches that every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. The rod and staff aren't signs of punishment. They're signs of a shepherd who refuses to let you settle for less than your destiny. Then David shifts the scene completely. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. That's not just about victory. That's about confidence. Picture this: a lavish table full of abundance, peace, and joy. And all around it, those who doubted you, betrayed you, and left you. But instead of revenge, you sit and feast. That's divine confidence. That's the kind of quiet strength Hill spoke about. The kind that doesn't scream for attention but gets undeniable results. Because real power isn't loud. It's consistent, it shows up, it does the work, it trusts the process. This verse is also a reminder that you don't have to eliminate every enemy to succeed. You just have to stay seated at the table prepared for you. Don't get up to argue. Don't get distracted by critics. Don't chase validation. Sit. Focus. Eat. Grow. Let the results speak for you. Your success will be your response. Your peace will be your protection. You don't need to prove yourself to people who never saw your value. Just keep walking in alignment and the table will speak louder than any defense. David continues, "You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows." Anointing wasn't just a ceremonial act. It represented favor, calling, authority. And when he says my cup overflows, he's describing more than material blessing. He's describing a state where what's inside of him is so full, it can't be contained. That's not just abundance. That's overflow. And overflow is never just for you. It's for those around you. A life of overflow blesses your family, your friends, even strangers who cross your path. Napoleon Hill reminds us that abundance begins in the mind. And when the mind is saturated with purpose, faith, and gratitude, it attracts the resources to match. You don't chase overflow. You align with it. You prepare for it. You become the kind of person who can handle it. If your soul is dry, even the biggest blessing will feel like not enough. But if your soul is full, even a little becomes more than sufficient. That's the secret most people miss. Prosperity is not about what you have. It's about what you carry, what overflows from you. That's why David's not begging for more. He's declaring that what's already in him is enough. That's where self-worth is born. That's where confidence is rooted. Not in the applause of others, but in the internal knowing that you've been anointed. You're not here by accident. You're not building alone. You've been set apart, called, empowered. And that's why you can walk into rooms that used to intimidate you. That's why you can speak in places where you once stayed silent. That's why your energy shifts when you realize your identity isn't tied to opinions, but to purpose. The anointing also represents pressure. Oil doesn't come without crushing. And that's something David understood deeply. The pain you faced, the loss, the battles, they weren't wasted. They were part of the pressing that brought out what was always inside you. Like olives crushed to release oil, you had to go through seasons where everything felt like it was falling apart. But in truth, things were falling into place. Your purpose was rising. Your capacity was expanding. Your character was being refined. And then David ends with a promise, not a request. "Surely, goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life." He doesn't say maybe. He says surely. That's confidence born from experience. When you've seen God show up in valleys, protect you with his rod, guide you with his staff, seat you at the table and fill your cup, you stop wondering if goodness is coming. You know it's chasing you down. You know mercy is walking behind. You cleaning up your mistakes, covering your flaws, rewriting your past. Goodness and mercy aren't rewards for perfection. They're gifts of grace. They follow the surrendered, not just the successful. They're for the broken who still believe, the tired who still show up, the doubters who still pray. That's the beauty of divine pursuit. You don't have to earn it, you just have to accept it. Hill said faith removes limitations. That's what goodness and mercy do. They remove the mental and emotional limits that tell you you're not worthy, not ready, not enough. And when you walk in that awareness, when You carry the shepherd's guidance, the protection, the provision, the restoration. You begin to walk different. Speak different. Think different. You no longer chase status, you carry presence. You no longer need to compete. You're too focused on your calling. That's not arrogance. That's alignment. That's what happens when you've tasted overflow, been seated at the table, and walked through the valley without fear. You become unshakable. Not because life is easy, but because you finally understand who walks beside you. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That final line isn't just a poetic conclusion. It's a declaration of identity, a statement of belonging. After everything David described, the valley, the enemies, the overflow, he lands here, in stillness, in certainty, in a sense of spiritual home. And that's what most people in this generation are starving for. Not more noise, not more information, but a place where their soul can rest. A place where they are not defined by what they produce, but by who they are in essence. To dwell means to remain, to settle, to stay. Not to visit occasionally, not to appear when things go wrong, but to live in constant awareness of God's presence. That's what David longed for more than anything else. And that's the very thing most people abandon in pursuit of success. Napoleon Hill warned about this trap. The temptation to focus only on the external, the visible, the measurable. But without spiritual grounding, all that we build becomes fragile. Because if your peace is tied to what you can touch, it will collapse when you can't control it. Think about it. You can have the money, the house, the followers. But if your soul is restless, none of it satisfies. That's why David, even after talking about wealth, power, and protection, says the greatest reward is presence. Being with the source. Living. From the inside out. Dwell in the house of the Lord, not just on Sundays, not just in crisis. Every day, every moment. That's the secret most overlook. Prosperity isn't just what you have. It's who you're with while you have it. It's peace when everything is uncertain. It's clarity in a noisy world. It's walking through storms and still sleeping at night. David's words aren't abstract. They are deeply personal. He had every material success, royal status, military victories, influence, and yet he speaks like a man who's found something greater. That's what happens when the soul discovers alignment. When your mind, heart, and spirit move in the same direction. You stop striving, you start flowing, you stop chasing validation, you start living from vision. That's when you realize that the house of the Lord isn't just a building, it's a state of being. It's the awareness of His presence in every area of your life. When Hill talks about definiteness of purpose as the starting point of all achievement, he's echoing this idea. You cannot build lasting success without knowing where you're rooted. Otherwise, every storm will knock you off course. Every failure will feel like a verdict. Every delay will feel like denial. But when you dwell in divine presence, you become immovable. Not because the world gets easier, but because you've stopped trying to fight it alone. You've chosen to abide in something greater. That's what the journey of Psalm 23 shows us. From lack to abundance, from fear to faith, from wandering to dwelling. It's not a psalm of wishful thinking. It's a roadmap for spiritual authority. And it all starts with a decision to trust the shepherd, to surrender the illusion of control, to let go of the need to always understand. Because some things won't make sense until you've walked through them. Some valleys only reveal their purpose in hindsight. But even there, in the dark, you are being led. The truth is, you've never been alone. Not in your lowest night. Not in your deepest grief. Not in your moments of silence when the heavens felt closed. The shepherd never left. Sometimes he was guiding. Other times, he was simply holding space, waiting for you to stop running, waiting for you to hear the still small voice above the storm. That voice doesn't always shout. Often it whispers. And to hear it, you have to be still. You have to return. You have to dwell. Imagine if today you stopped searching for peace in the next achievement. Imagine if you stopped measuring your worth by how much you do and started seeing it through the eyes of who you are becoming. What would change? How would you walk if you truly believed that goodness and mercy were chasing you, that you were seated at a table, that your cup was already overflowing. Most people are fighting battles they were never meant to fight, simply because they forgot who's walking beside them. They try to fix everything, prove everything, earn everything. But Psalm 23 doesn't tell you to fix, prove, or earn. It invites you to rest, trust, and receive. The shepherd doesn't ask the sheep to figure it all out. He just asks them to follow, to stay close, to stay connected. Napoleon Hill said that success requires faith, persistence, and the refusal to quit. But faith doesn't mean forcing outcomes. It means believing in unseen realities, trusting that there's a design to the delay, that your life is part of a bigger pattern you can't always see, but you're always part of. That's the power of spiritual vision. It lets you see beyond what's happening and anchor into what's eternal. So maybe today isn't about doing more. Maybe it's about remembering more, remembering who you are, remembering where you're going, remembering that the shepherd who started the journey with you hasn't left your side, and he never will. You may have walked through loss. You may be in the middle of confusion. You may be questioning everything. But your story is not over. The valley is not the destination. The enemies are not the end. The overflow is not just a dream. You were made to dwell, not to survive, not to struggle forever, to dwell in peace, in purpose, in divine presence. That's your inheritance, that's your legacy. That's the true prosperity, peace that doesn't depend on conditions, joy that doesn't shrink under pressure, and a sense of belonging that can't be taken away. When you understand that, you stop chasing blessings and start becoming one. There's something powerful that happens when you stop treating scripture as poetry and start reading it as strategy. Psalm 23 isn't just about comfort. It's a coded manual for inner transformation, for aligning your spirit with a frequency that attracts not only peace, but purpose, abundance, and legacy. It reveals a mindset, a way of seeing the world, a perspective that refuses to bow to fear, scarcity, or confusion. And when you align that with the teachings of Napoleon Hill, everything sharpens. Hill didn't just write about wealth. He wrote about clarity of thought, dominion over emotion, and the creative force of faith. That's what Psalm 23 is doing on a soul level. It's training your thoughts to surrender panic and cling to presence. Training your heart to recognize that provision doesn't come from force, but from flow. And training your mind to shift from fear of lack to confidence in divine timing. Let's break it down again. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. That line alone rewires the operating system of your brain, because most people wake up every day with a subconscious belief that they're behind, that they're missing something, that they need to fix or find or hustle in order to be complete. But David starts from fullness, not future fullness. Present. I lack nothing. When you start from that belief, your energy shifts. You stop operating from desperation. You stop chasing validation. You begin making decisions that are aligned, not reactive. That's why so many people sabotage their own success. They're trying to fill a spiritual void with material excess. They grind without guidance. They push without peace. And they wonder why they burn out. Now contrast that with Hill's principle of definiteness of purpose. He said, "There is one quality which one must possess to win, and that is definiteness of purpose, the knowledge of what one wants and a burning desire to possess it." Psalm 23 is David declaring his purpose, to dwell in the presence of the Lord. That's not passive, that's laser-focused clarity. Everything else flows from there. Rest, guidance, provision, protection, overflow, legacy. Too often, people confuse spirituality with inactivity, as if trusting God means doing nothing. But this psalm is full of action. He leads, he restores, he prepares, he anoints. It's not a stagnant life, it's a deeply aligned one. When you trust the shepherd, your life doesn't get slower, it gets sharper, more intentional, more full of momentum. Because now your energy isn't scattered, trying to control everything. It's focused on listening, aligning, moving when it's time to move. That's why spiritual clarity is the most powerful asset you can have in a chaotic world. Because when everyone else is reacting to crisis, you're moving by design. When others are overwhelmed by fear, you're grounded in truth. When storms hit, you're already anchored. Not because you're stronger, but because you're surrendered. Think about the line, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Notice, it doesn't say if you walk. It says, even though, which means valleys are part of the path, shadows are part of the journey. Struggle is not a sign of failure, it's the training ground for faith. Napoleon Hill called it the testing point, the moment where most people quit, the invisible barrier between the current version of you and the transformed version. He said, "Every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit." That's exactly what Psalm 23 reveals. The valley is not punishment, it's preparation. And if you quit in the valley, you never see the table. If you panic in the shadow, you never experience the oil. And that's the strategy most people miss. You cannot escape the valley, but you can choose how you walk through it. You can walk with fear, or you can walk with faith. You can walk blaming everything around you, or you can walk holding the hand of the shepherd, letting each step refine your vision, your character, your inner strength. Because once you pass through it, you carry authority. You speak from experience, and people can feel the difference. This is how you build legacy, not just by achieving great things, but by walking through dark places and bringing light, by letting your scars become someone else's map, by turning your survival into someone else's strategy. Psalm 23 isn't just a prayer for peace. It's a prophecy of power, of becoming someone unshakable. And when David says, "You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows," he's describing a shift from being a seeker to being a source. That's what true prosperity is. Not just getting what you need, but becoming someone who pours into others, someone who builds, who creates, who mentors, who lifts. That's how you multiply legacy. Hill emphasized the law of compensation, that you are rewarded in direct proportion to the value you deliver. Psalm 23 is a mirror of that. When you allow God to lead, restore, and refine you, you don't just receive blessings, you become one. You don't just wait for opportunity, you attract it. You don't just hope for overflow, you become the vessel through which overflow happens. And that only happens when you stop living on defense, when you stop reacting to life and start aligning with purpose, when you stop waiting for the storm to pass and start learning how to walk in the rain without losing your fire. This is the final truth that ties Psalm 23 and Napoleon Hill together. True success is built inside first. It's the result of internal clarity, spiritual alignment, and a decision to live guided instead of scattered. And that's available to you right now, not someday, not when you fix everything, but in this moment, with this breath, right here, in the middle of your journey. You don't need to wait until everything is perfect to feel peace. You don't have to figure it all out to know you're on the right path. You don't even need all the answers, because what you truly need is presence, awareness, a willingness to stop, to breathe, and to reconnect with the shepherd who's been guiding you quietly, faithfully, even through the chaos. This is where so many people get stuck. They think they need to fix their past before they can move forward, or hit some external goal before they allow themselves to feel worthy. But Psalm 23 turns that logic upside down. It says, you are already worthy. You are already seen, already guided, already loved. And that's where legacy begins, not when the world claps for you, but when your soul stops searching for applause and starts echoing with purpose. Napoleon Hill built his entire philosophy around this truth. Though he said it in different words, he called it applied faith, not blind belief, not hope without action, but the intentional daily decision to trust in things unseen and move forward as if what you seek is already yours. That's what David did. He didn't wait for perfect conditions to trust. He trusted through the valley. He trusted when enemies surrounded him. He trusted even when it felt like death was near, because David understood something most people overlook. Spiritual confidence doesn't come from having control. It comes from knowing who's in control, and that's the shift many never make. They keep trying to force peace instead of receiving it. Keep trying to earn love instead of embodying it. Keep trying to outrun fear instead of walking through it, guided, protected, and deeply anchored. When you internalize Psalm 23, you don't just feel better, you become better, stronger, wiser, less shaken by the noise around you, because you've tuned into something deeper. You've remembered what the world wants you to forget, that your value doesn't come from hustle or perfection or performance. It comes from presence. And when you live from that presence, you become magnetic. Your energy shifts. People feel something different when you walk into a room, not because you're louder or smarter, but because you're rooted. They feel peace in your voice, clarity in your words, power in your stillness. That's the legacy, and it's built by those who dare to walk a different path. Not the loud path, not the crowded one, but the path of presence, discipline, and divine awareness. This is what Napoleon Hill meant when he said, "What the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. But the real secret is what your mind is conceiving. If your mind is full of fear, stress, noise, then even your goals will feel hollow. But when your mind is filled with the promises of Psalm 23, peace, provision, protection, then your goals become extensions of your purpose. They're no longer just about you. They're about the people you're called to serve, the lives you're meant to impact, the light you're here to bring. Because here's the truth, you are not here just to survive. You are not here to endlessly strive. You are not here to live a life of confusion, comparison, or compromise. You were created to walk with purpose, to move with conviction, to speak with clarity, to build something that outlives you. That's what Psalm 23 gives you. A spiritual map, a divine blueprint, a reminder that you are never walking alone, and that everything you need to walk in purpose is already within you. So if you've been feeling lost, if you've been feeling behind, if you've been carrying guilt, shame, pressure, let this be the moment you lay it down. Not because life is suddenly easier, but because you're no longer carrying it alone. The shepherd is still walking with you, even in your silence, even in your confusion, even in your fear. You've never been abandoned, and you are never without direction. You may not know every step, but you know the one who does. And that's more than enough. When you live from that place, everything changes. Not instantly, but deeply. You stop rushing, you start listening, you stop controlling, you start aligning. You stop asking, "What if I fail?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming through this?" Because that is what determines your legacy. Not just what you do, but how you do it. Not just the battles you win, but the presence you carry while you fight. So let the words of Psalm 23 become more than verses. Let them become your inner compass. Let them speak louder than your fear. Let them remind you who you are, chosen, protected, provided for, empowered, and called to dwell, not just visit, not just survive, but to dwell in the presence of the one who's been guiding you all along. That's the real success. That's the real prosperity. That's the kind of legacy that no one can steal.